Good afternoon, buenas tardes, bienvenidos. Welcome to this edition of Via Voices. Via Voices is a Tuesday 12 noon series in which we check in with friends and allies, compañeros, compañeras from across the network of Via International. And we appreciate your joining us today. Our guest today is Nancy Maldonado, who is the CEO of the Chicano Federation of San Diego. And to lead us in getting to know Nancy and hearing more about her work today is our Senior Program Director, Rigoberto Reyes. So I'm going to turn it over to Rigo, but will you join me with a round of applause as we welcome Nancy Maldonado to Via Voices. Bienvenida, Nancy, and welcome, Rigo.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate the introduction. I want to introduce Nancy Maldonado. She is the senior director at the Chicano.
And Rigo, you're freezing. Rigo, you're freezing up on me a little bit. Is he freezing for you as well?
Yes.
Rigo, maybe you turn off your camera and see if we're gonna catch your audio.
Is that better?
I think so. Thank you.
Okay, well thank you, and I apologize for that. These are technical difficulties that sometimes we can't avoid. Welcome, Nancy. Once again, thank you for agreeing and being here with us. One of the things that I important in the work we are doing in the Nancy, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where you from? Where'd you grow up?
I didn't hear all of that, but I think I got the gist of it. Yeah, so I was born and raised in Bishop, California. So if nobody knows where that is, because a lot of people don't, it's a very small town, about 6 hours north of San Diego. A lot of people know it as being the last town before you get to Mammoth Mountain. So yeah, small town, born and raised there. My dad was a farmer. My mom was a school bus driver. So really grew up on the farm, working, helping my dad and my brothers, and they still live there. And so it's really special to be able to go back still and visit them and visit the farm and kind of, reminisce on how I grew up. And I had a really, really special childhood, and I'm grateful for that.
Thank you. Thank you. Could you hear me okay?
Yes,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rigo.
Okay. I wasn't sure if I was getting across or not. Working for the Chicano Federation, Nancy, how does your own sense of identity, as far as, do you identify as a Chicana? And go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I didn't know there was a second part. Go ahead.
No, that's part of it. That's enough.
Yeah, it's actually been really interesting to kind of rediscover that that identity, because it's not, I didn't grow up identifying as Chicana. My parents didn't identify as Chicanos. They identified as Mexicanos. So for me, part of coming to Chicano Federation, I knew I had a lot to learn, right? Because this is a 52-year-old organization that has such a deep, rich history. So it was a lot of me really reading, understanding the history of the organization, understanding the people who were involved with the organization, the people who helped create it, and meeting with them, hearing from them, understanding why the Chicano Federation was created, why, what identifying as Chicano really means. And I think there's still kind of a lot of misconceptions around that. So it's been really, I think, fulfilling for me to be in this organization and to understand that identity and what that means, and that identifying as Chicana is something to be so incredibly proud of, especially here in San Diego, where there was such a strong Chicano and Chicana movement, and it really helped to shape San Diego. It's something that I'm so proud of, to be able to identify with that community and to identify as Chicana.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I myself am a product of the Chicano movement, so I really relate to what you're saying. But could you talk a little bit, maybe you touched upon the history of the Chicano Federation, and I think for our viewers that are not familiar with the Chicano Federation and how it came about, I think if you want to share a little bit about that.
Yes, absolutely. So, what I've been able to gather is that, like I said, so the organization was actually formed 52 years ago, but the work obviously has been going on for much longer than that. And it was some of our like really strong leaders and activists that were doing the work in terms of advocating for our Chicano and Latino community, and against the injustices that were happening. And it wasn't just against our community; it was against communities of color. And one of the things that I have learned is just how united different groups were in that struggle, and how they really came together to understand that they would be stronger together because they were facing so many of the same injustices. And so, there was a lot of kind of individual groups doing the work, and they all decided, hey, you know what, we'd be stronger if we were under one umbrella and we all came together under one united name. So it was about 14 different groups that came together. They formed the Chicano Federation. So it really was a federation, and did some really powerful and impactful work in terms of advocacy, and advocating for our community. And one of the things that strikes me as really, just really touched me is that a couple of the issues that were at the forefront of what they were fighting for and against was really around voting rights, around equality in hiring, and against police brutality. And so here we are 52 years later, and those issues are still at the forefront of our struggle and the things that we continue to fight for. So that to me is really says a lot in terms of the work, that the foundation that all of those people and all of those amazing advocates laid for people like me to continue to do the work and continue to make the changes. And it's such an incredible honor to be able to be entrusted with that work and carrying on their legacy, because really, while sometimes my job might seem challenging, I think of how hard it must have been for the folks who did it 52 years ago, right? And how like the different challenges that they faced. So it really is such an honor to be able to continue this work and recognize that while some of our struggles are still the same, I'm super fortunate and have so many different advantages to be able to lead this work. I mean, just as a woman leading this organization, how different it must have been for the women who came before me who led it, just because of the times that we're in and how different that must be. So the organization has a fascinating history, and I have boxes of archives that I just love going through, and I have not gotten a chance to even go through all of them, but it's really been a powerful learning lesson for me, not just to understand the organization, but to understand even like the history of where I come from and what the Chicano community means to San Diego.
Thank you for sharing that. The Chicano Federation brings a lot of memories to me, in a sense, because I've been involved with so many different organizations here in Heights. But I vividly remembered one of our first meetings as we were establishing the San Diego Lower Council here in San Diego back in 1979. Our first meeting was held at the old Chicano Federation building here in Logan Heights, which is the building that's going to be turned into the Chicano Park Museum and Cultural Center. So therefore, it does bring a lot of memories. Everything you just mentioned right now is so true for as far as the people that were involved back in and still continue to be involved today. Some that are already no longer with us, but it does a lot of warm heart to my heart, at least. In regards to the COVID situation now, do you see the impact in the Chicano community?
Yeah, so that's really, I've been the CEO for a little over 2 years, and one of the things that I felt really strongly about was returning to those advocacy roots, because I think it's so important, and I firmly believe that programs are helpful in order to help families with their needs, but programs alone aren't going to move the needle. We need programs and advocacy. And so that was kind of my vision for the organization. Like I really wanted to revamp the advocacy arm. And, so when COVID struck, that to me was the time where we really stepped it up in terms of our advocacy efforts, because right away we saw the numbers and how disproportionately they were affecting our community. And what was also so clear and so evident is that this wasn't by chance, right? Like it was a perfect storm because of the systemic inequalities that had been in place for so long. And for us, I remember having a conversation with my team and with actually some other community leaders, and we said this is our time. This is our time to really speak out against these injustices, but also to really make sure that we don't go back to status quo, that we don't go back to normal, because normal wasn't working for our community, and this is why we're being impacted so heavily. And that really stuck with me, right? Like, this is the moment that we need to advocate for change, and this is the opportunity to really make change happen. So we started speaking out about what was happening to Latinos and Chicanos in San Diego County, but also what we were seeing it across the country, in terms of the not just the COVID infections, but also the COVID deaths. And then when testing was made available, like where those testing sites were going, and then when vaccines came available, how that was rolling out. So it has been like we've taken on the role of really pushing equity and how to better serve the Latino and Chicano community here in San Diego County. And with that, we did get the opportunity to lead the education and outreach for all of the Latino and Spanish speaking community in San Diego County, all around COVID. And that has been a lot of work, but it's also been a tremendous learning lesson on so many different fronts. And when I look at the numbers of Latinos that are getting vaccinated in San Diego County versus some other parts of the country, I do feel proud of the work that we've all collectively done to make that happen, because I do think that our hard work has paid off and that we've made a difference. And granted, there's still so much work to do, and it's nothing to take a step back or to stop working. But it does feel like there is some progress being made.
Thank you. In regards to the same issue, the same topic, do you have any specific story that maybe stuck to you in regards to the pandemic in the community? Like maybe something that you personally have seen?
Oh gosh, there were so many stories. I mean, I think one of the things that happened that was really kind of visible is, the number of people that were calling our organization for support and for help really doubled overnight. And a lot of that was people saying, I have nowhere else to go. I need help, right? Like whether it was that they lost their job or that someone tested COVID positive and it was the person who was earning the income in the family. Those stories were coming daily and multiple stories. So early on, one of the programs that we helped with was with rent relief. And I remember, there were certain team members that were working on that program. And I remember having to go out daily and remind them to put the phone down, take a break, go for a walk, right? Because they were hearing story after story after story. And at that time, undocumented families were not eligible. And that was a lot of the stories that they were hearing, right? Like, where do I go? Where do I turn to for help? No one's helping us, which was true early on. And, with that, my team and I rallied and were able to secure some funds specifically to help undocumented families. And as you can imagine, I mean, that went really quickly because of the need. So yeah, I mean, so many stories, but I think the ones that impacted me the most were undocumented families, right? I'm the proud daughter of immigrant parents, and so I really felt that, and I really wanted to be able to help them and to support them. And thankfully, thanks to our generous community, we have been able to do that, and that has been, at least a light at the end of the tunnel for some people. Although I will never think that we're doing enough. We could always be doing more, but.
Thank you for saying that. As far as that, your collaborations and partnership with other organizations such as yours, could you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I know to be true is that we're stronger together, and that if we all work together, we can have far more impact. So one of the things that we did around COVID was to form the San Diego Latino Health Coalition, which brought together a number of different organizations. It was nonprofits, for-profits, and just people that were just really invested in helping the community and in ensuring that that COVID resources were getting out to the most impacted communities. And so, coalition work is tough. It's a lot of work, but we did come together. We did some really amazing work in terms of being able to reach the entire county through our different organizations and the reach that they have and the families that they serve. So that was really rewarding for us to, at a time when our community needed us most, to be able to come together and work toward a common cause. And like I said, we have started to see some really good numbers in terms of the number of people that are getting vaccinated. So I think that's been helpful. And if we contributed in any way to those numbers and towards getting this pandemic under control, then we did our job.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I remember running into you at the end of the month, at the end of March here at Chicano Park with the Turning Wheel project, and it was very impressive as far as not just the people that showed up to get vaccinated, but the different levels of organizations and volunteers that came to support and help. Anything you want to add to that? I think your participation there was very clear.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we, in terms of the people that we serve and kind of what we were hearing, that they wanted those grassroots community events, right? Because we've heard so much around the narrative of vaccine hesitancy and that people don't want it and that there was mistrust. And I'll say, to speak to that, there was some mistrust, and what people needed to hear from is someone who looked like them, who lived in their community, to say, hey, I got it and it's okay, or trust me, this is something we all need to do. And I think those are the efforts that we saw, especially at the event at Chicano Park, is that it was 100% community led, and I think that's what made it so successful and so beautiful. And there were people in line that shared, I wouldn't have been here getting this vaccine had someone not knocked on my door and kind of convinced me that it was the right thing to do. And I think that speaks so much to the power of, community-led efforts that are led by people from the community. And I mean, that event was a perfect example, right? So for those of you who are listening, there was a number of different organizations that came together to vaccinate 300 people at Chicano Park. And the way the outreach was done was that the Brown Berets went door to door, knocking on people's doors, and stood out in front of Northgate, telling people about the event. And that day, over 300 people got vaccinated thanks to their efforts and thanks to their outreach. And it was so rewarding to be a part of that, because that to me is what community is all about.
Right. I totally agree. As far as being such a grassroots initiative, such a grassroots effort, if you will, and have it been there, I did see the same impact and the same conversations I had with people that were there, as far as particular people that are undocumented, and that otherwise wouldn't have this opportunity. So I really want to thank you and everybody else that participated in that specific initiative. I know we've been talking quite a bit about COVID. Maybe you want to touch upon maybe some of the other services that the Chicano Federation also serves. I know you guys do more than COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely affordable housing. That's something that we've done for a really long time. So we own a number of properties in San Diego and are able to offer those at below market value rates. But it kind of in line with COVID is that we have been able to go to our affordable housing properties and have people vaccinated there, which again, like meeting people where they're at. So that's been really cool to be able to do that. So affordable housing, subsidized childcare. We know that for working families that the cost of childcare can be prohibitive. They want to work, but childcare is expensive. So we have a number of different programs where we help with the cost of childcare. So as long as the families are working, going to school, that they have a need for childcare, we will cover some or all of the costs of the childcare for their children. And in addition to that, we also there's quality control for the family childcares that we work with. So we're making sure that there's a curriculum in place, that it's a safe environment for children, and that children are really thriving in those environments. So we're taking care of the children, but then we're also working with the parents in order to help them to kind of get to the next step, whether it's that they want a higher paying job, that they want to switch careers, do they want to go back to school, so that the goal is for us to really provide the resources and the support for them to be able to get to a different position in their lives so that they're able to support their families and to really self-empowerment is our goal. So we do that with childcare, but then we also have early childhood education. We have a couple of different programs. We have a preschool in Barrio Logan, right there on Logan Avenue. And then we also have a early childhood program where we go to families' homes and we teach the parents how to be their child's first teacher. We teach them what milestones to look for, how to help their children develop appropriately. And that's a really rewarding program because we're able to really support parents in their journey of being a parent. And to me, that's so important. I wish I had that program when my son was little. I didn't know how many words he was supposed to speak when he was 3. And we're able to go into the homes and really support the parents through that journey. And then we also have a nutrition program because again, in our goal to support children, we usually support them 0 to 5, that's our age range. We know that children can't learn, we know that children can't thrive unless they are eating healthy meals. So through that program, through our nutrition program, we feed about 7,500 children a month. And making sure that they're getting nutritious meals that meet certain requirements. We also have a workforce development program where we help women from the community to start their own childcare in their home. So we are able to train them, help them get their license. If there's any upfront costs that they are not able to afford, we're able to support them with some of those costs. And then we're able to enroll them in some of our programs so that we help to keep their business open. Because as we all know, opening a business is just the start. Being able to maintain it and keep it open and for your business to thrive is a whole nother challenge. So we support them throughout kind of the length of their business. What else do we do? Let's see. And then of course, civic engagement, that's something that we're really passionate about. So last year we were really involved with census, with voter registration. So, we're going to continue those efforts. And then currently, because obviously we're still really recovering from COVID, we are helping with the City of San Diego's rental assistance program. We're helping with the State of California's rental assistance program. And then we do have a flexible financial assistance program that we offer that prioritizes undocumented families, but obviously is open to anyone that needs flexible financial assistance right now. And then with that, we do a number of distributions. We've done about 2 distributions a month since COVID started. So normally what we will do is kind of gauge from the families that we serve what their needs are, and then secure those items, and then do distribution. So for example, next weekend, for Dia del Niño, we have a distribution where we will be giving out gift cards, diapers, food, books, toys, and backpacks for kids. So we'll serve about 300 families that day who will come through and be able to get all of those things kind of in one shot. So yeah, a variety of different things, but obviously we've had to adjust a lot because of COVID and be responsive to what our community is really needing. So, as long as we need to, we'll continue to do that.
Good. Well, thank you for sharing all that. As John stated at the beginning, VIA usually focuses quite a bit as far as the border and border topics, border issues. Any work you'll be doing as far as that, and maybe with some binational initiatives, anything in that nature?
Yeah, so one of the things that we really championed, so there, especially when the vaccines were first rolling out, there was a lot of talk about who should be able to get them, like should people be able to cross the border to come and get them, issues around that. And so we spoke out pretty strongly around making the vaccine available to anyone. And if you recall, like in some places in the beginning, they were asking for a social security number, they were asking for ID, they were asking for, you had to verify that you lived in the US. And we spoke out very strongly against that, especially being a border region, with the understanding that if we really wanted to get COVID under control, we needed to make the vaccine available to anyone, especially because we know how many people live in Tijuana and come to San Diego to work, and how much San Diego benefits from kind of that workforce, and that we did have a responsibility to make sure that they were vaccinated. And I do remember that there was a couple of shows that I did and interviews that I did to speak out on that. And one of those was NPR National, and the backlash that I got from that, right? With people like really strongly disagreeing with that statement and that viewpoint, and saying that, Mexico needs to take care of their own and we need to take care of ours. I mean, I got hate mail and death threats and all of those different things from doing that interview and taking that stance. So again, just, really interesting that people would feel so strongly against that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing that. I mean, it really takes some guts really to make that type of a stand. John, I don't know if you want to open it for if any of the folks out there that might have some questions.
Yeah. Thanks so much, and thanks again, Nancy, for joining us. I'll open it up for questions and conversation with our friends in Zoom. But first, I just wanted to, if I could, I'm curious, partly because I think I mentioned when we chatted that I lived in Calexico for a while, which is also, kind of not that far away, but kind of a remote location, right? And I'm just interested to hear a little bit more about your experience, growing up in Indio, or your family. From that perspective of Indio, as you think of growing up there, did you feel identified with San Diego more, or with Los Angeles more? Like when you started to come of age and imagine going off to the big city, maybe. What was the big city for somebody who lived in Bishop growing up?
In Bishop, yeah. So it was either Reno or Los Angeles.
Okay.
I chose Los Angeles.
Is that where you went to school, or?
Yeah. And it's interesting because my brothers chose Reno. I have 2 older brothers, and I was the one that chose LA. And I do think I made the right call.
I hear you. Yeah, I'm always just fascinated by this, this kind of diaspora, right, of the Mexican immigrant diaspora into, especially that Inland Empire, Riverside, San Bernardino sweep, and then of course with the big hub in Los Angeles. But how about, what was it that drew you back to San Diego? Was it specifically work with the Chicano Federation, or this kind of work, and how did you identify with the border, or as a fronteriza, or did you feel like you remained connected to Mexico even while you were being raised in Bishop and going to school in Los Angeles?
Yeah, so I remember every year we would still go back. So my parents are from Chihuahua, from Cuauhtemoc,
Okay.
and we would go back every year without a doubt. So I felt very connected to Mexico growing up. And I think once I got a little bit older and we got busier, right, and we didn't go anymore, I do feel like I had lost some of that.
Yeah.
And so, I was living in LA, and the reason I ended up, and while I was in LA, I owned my own business and kind of was doing well. And then I decided that I wanted to come back to school and get my PhD. And so I settled on, I ended up coming to San Diego to do my PhD work here in public health. And while I was here is when I started working in nonprofit, and I haven't left.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. So and now, and you still have grandparents or aunts, uncles, other family in Chihuahua, I'm guessing?
Yes, they're all still there. And it's been a long time since I've been able to get back, and especially with COVID,
Sure.
that has prolonged it. But gosh, such a beautiful, beautiful place. And I look forward to being able to return and kind of sharing that experience with my son. And so hopefully, knock on wood, that's going to be soon.
I hope so too. I hope so. Yeah. And so, so the extended family, I think of these extended, binational Mexican-American, Chicano fronterizo families as such an important part of the life of the people of the borderlands. Do you have your brothers and sisters or anybody who's gone back to Mexico? Has anybody, anybody in your family kind of chosen to return to Mexico to set up shop?
Yes, so a really cool story. So what my middle brother, who's older than I am, but in the middle, him and his partner and their daughter, one day, and they owned their own business, they were doing well. One day they decided they had just had enough. Yeah. And they packed everything they owned in the truck and they just headed south. And they ended up in Pescadero, a little town, yeah. And so we've been, before COVID, we went and visited them a couple of times there, and it's a really small town, but again, just really cool. And they live off the land, they grow their own fruits and vegetables, and they just live such a simple and beautiful life that I am jealous of every day.
Yeah. Yeah. I know the grass can always seem greener, of course, but I know how that. Well, yes, I mentioned too that so many of the friends of Via International are kind of transfronterizos, or they're, U.S. citizens who may be retired in Mexico, or of course Mexican folks who work in the United States, or U.S. citizens who work in the United States, and that kind of, and as you mentioned, people from afar, they really just don't get it, right? From far away, they don't understand the first thing about the way the border works and doesn't work for people, right?
Yeah, and how much we depend on each other.
Yeah.
I think that's the part that they don't get. Like, you can't understand unless you live in a border region, that it goes both ways.
Yeah. Well, and one other question that I had, and then I will open it up. And so friends in the Zoom room, please get ready. Feel free to ask questions or share a topic that you'd like to hear Nancy's perspective on. But one other topic that intrigued me was I was very involved in the census of 2010, 10 years ago. Working with a local social justice foundation, but really working on outreach to what they called hard to count communities. And a big part of the conversation then, I'm just curious to see if you see the same conversation unfolding now, is, how to build this kind of what at the time we were calling civic participation infrastructure, and to kind of carry it across campaigns, right? So that the leadership development and the relationships that are built, for instance, on census outreach, can also be then leveraged onto voter registration or voting, get out the vote. Or in this case, I imagine those same relationships paid off in your work in, facing down the pandemic and the COVID crisis. So I'm curious, just an update, maybe, is that a live conversation here in San Diego? Does that continue, this notion of building leadership infrastructure in these underserved communities that kind of builds across time, and how's it going?
Yeah. So yes, I think that's an ongoing conversation. What kind of threw a wrench in this census is COVID, right? Because in the middle of it, now we weren't allowed to go door to door. We weren't allowed, and so that was challenging. and so, you know, we did still have to reach out to people, and it was different. But I think one of the things that I think one of the benefits of COVID, and maybe how COVID has challenged us to rethink the way that we think about civic engagement in communities, is because everything was virtual, everything was remote. People now, like community people, were able to call in to city council meetings or to board of supervisors meetings, right? And so there were times where we had to rally the community and say, hey, we need you to speak out on this. And people were able to do that, whereas before they might have not been able to go down, attend in person, sit there. And so there's definitely been some pros, but there's also been some cons. So I think the benefit, I guess the silver lining of COVID is that it's forced us to kind of rethink how we do that and how we really engage people, and how that might change moving forward.
Yeah, right. Well, now, and just last question for me. Tell me a little bit more about how do you all think leadership and your leaders, and you, I know you have a staff. You shared with me that your staff has been going into the office throughout COVID. I suppose did you consider yourselves, all of you, as essential workers? You were on the front lines of community service. Is that how you thought of your work this last year?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's interesting because I did kind of get my team together when COVID struck and said, you know, we have the opportunity, like obviously we can work from home if we really want to, like, you know, our services don't really lend themselves to working from home, but if you all don't feel safe and would prefer to work from home, then let's figure out a way to do that. And overwhelmingly, my team said, this is the time where our community needs us most. This is the time where we have to step up, not step down. And they kept coming in every day. They showed up.
Well, and I know that Chicano Federation is very identified with Barrio Logan, Logan Heights, that community, but do you think of as the aspiration that Chicano Federation would have a county-wide reach, or do you have other staff at other locations around the county, or are you really concentrated in the historic neighborhoods of San Diego?
You know, we have stronger presence in different areas, but we do have a county-wide reach through our different programs. So yeah, ideally, you know, and you know, perhaps maybe one day when there's a different CEO, they'll have a different vision. But my vision is, I don't really have a vision of Chicano Federation serving hundreds of thousands of people. I love that we serve 20,000 people a year, and I want to really be able to serve them and have an impact, and know that when they leave here, they are in a better position for having been in one of our programs. So my focus isn't on kind of reach or growth, it's on impact. And are we really moving the needle for this family? Are we really serving them in the way that they need? So yes, have a county-wide reach, but really our focus is impact.
Yeah, that rings, perhaps Elisa Sabatini will share a word about this, or Rigo himself, but the community development philosophy of VIA, of course, is very much about the kind of integral and organic development of communities and the leadership therein, right? As opposed to the far and wide, it's more deep reach and long, sustaining relationships across time that really have impact, right?
Right, and moving the needle, right? Because if at Chicano Federation, our goal is really to kind of break the cycle of poverty. Like one program alone isn't going to do that. It's really getting to know the family, understanding them, reaching them in a holistic way and meeting them where they're at.
Yeah. Well, Elisa, I don't know if you want to.
I would like to share a few thoughts, and thank you so much for being with us here today. As you probably know a bit from Rigo, we really believe in integrated community development work that really is that holistic approach to the development of people. And I was really intrigued by your comments about your nutrition programs, because that has been the foundation of our work in Mexico for 35 years, where we've looked to begin with the nutrition education and that creation of solidarity in community program. Not so much in a distribution of food way, but more in the way of engaging people to know one another, create the types of groups that then know what they need in their own communities. But then also with the opportunity, at least so far, we've been somewhat successful in Tijuana and Mexicali with small loans for productive projects. So I'm just thinking there is really an opportunity here. We could probably, on a small scale, it would be really interesting to collaborate with you and see how we could do some programming together.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. And especially, you know, it's when missions align, I think there's so much power there. So I look forward to our conversation.
Well, we'll continue that for sure. Let me go ahead and I'll just open up the Zoom room and see if there's anybody else who'd like to chip in. But yeah, Rigo shared with us how much he appreciated seeing you all at the front lines of the recent events at Chicano Park. And I hope this is the beginning of further conversation. So once again, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, friends, questions or you'd like to follow up with Nancy?
Yeah, John, I have a question.
Please, Jim.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy, so much for the presentation. It was really informative, and I have to admit I didn't know much about the Chicano Federation. I'd heard of it, but I'm happy to have learned something more. I have sort of a half-formed question, so you'll have to give me a little bit of a leeway here. You started by saying that you didn't identify as Chicana, you know, that you were Mexicana. And so I have to tell you, I'm an economist, and labor market studies show that, you know, immigrants have a predominantly positive effect on the economy. That's well established. But if they do affect any group negatively, it's most likely to be previous groups of immigrants. That is, that the new wave has made have some negative impacts because they're competing for the same jobs, et cetera, with a wave that has come before. And so I'm just wondering how this issue of identity of Chicana, Mexicana, how that interacts with groups of new immigrants, and if you see tensions at all between you know, people that are well established, they live in the US, they're resident citizens perhaps, and then there are new waves that are constantly coming. So if there's reaction to that, and how, if so, how do you guys manage that? How do you deal with that tension, if it exists? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, not to get political, but I think we saw some of that play out in the recent election, right? Is that there were, that there was a division between kind of like the newer immigrants, or, you know, like the newer citizens and people who had been here for a while. And so that was really interesting to me in seeing how that plays out. And I think it plays out in so many different facets of what we do. I often tell the story about coming to Chicano Federation, and I felt like I thought I would be like coming home, right? Because the majority of our staff was Latino and they were women, and I thought I would be welcomed with open arms. And that wasn't the case. And it was such a great learning lesson for me, because there was a difference in acculturation and education, and those things mattered. And it mattered how I presented. And, you know, in hindsight, I would have done it differently had I learned those lessons before. I think one of the ways that in our communication and how we kind of try to bridge that divide is to talk about how, especially here in California, you know, and particularly talking about Mexicanos or Chicanos, we were indigenous to this land, right? And to tie back into our indigenous roots, because that's so important to identify with and to ground us as who we are as a people, and that we all are, you know, essentially united in that. So whether, you know, kind of how we self-identify, at the very root of who we are is we are indigenous to this land, and especially to California. I don't know how people deal with it in other regions, but definitely that's a conversation that I see happening a lot.
Jim, your question really resonates with me, because as we talk with our staff in Tijuana, of course, our staff in Tijuana is working right now on projects specifically with new arrivals in Tijuana, but Via's long work was with earlier generations of arrivals in Tijuana, sort of the same dynamic you're talking about, where these waves of migration, people settling and then establishing themselves. And I used to tell people 10, 15 years ago that when I went to Tijuana, I never met anybody who was born in Tijuana. Everybody was from someplace else. That's no longer true, of course, right? You now have an entire generation or two of Tijuanenses. But of course, we saw in Tijuana as well, this at least when the first wave of Central Americans arrived in 2018-19, a very sharp counter attack, right? Backlash. And I like to think that the work that Aida, Robert, and some others on our team are doing down there are building bridges between long-term residents of Tijuana and these new arrivals. I mean, the market pits people against each other, right? Competing for jobs. But it's these social sector organizations that can build bridges and relationships and all the rest. And so it's,
and so one kind of follow-up, semi-related, is so Bishop has a large Native American community, and I'm wondering if what the relations between Mexicanos and the native peoples was there, and also to ask you if the Chicano Federation has alliances or ties with the Kumeyaay people in this region.
Yeah, so in Bishop, absolutely. I mean, I grew up knowing all about the reservation and what that meant, what it represented. I mean, at school, we would have powwows like on our campus. Like, it was very much integrated, which I think was really cool and special to grow up. Like, I didn't see a division between our communities growing up in Bishop. We were very much kind of one and the same. So I didn't know any different. I didn't know. And so that was really special to have that. And coming here, I actually see so much connection between our communities here in San Diego, and such a deep appreciation for each other. And I don't know if that's unique to San Diego, but I think it's special, right? And so at Chicano Federation, we do partner with the Kumeyaay community. We support each other. We don't specifically work on any programs together, but definitely we do have lines of communication and are very supportive of each other's work.
Yeah, I don't know how others feel. I feel like there's a little bit of an awakening here in San Diego to our relations with the Kumeyaay peoples, and certainly growing up here. I mean, back in my day, we were oblivious and ignorant. And all of the bad outcomes that come with being oblivious and ignorant. But I feel like I hear a lot more conversation about relations with the Kumeyaay, acknowledgement of the Kumeyaay, recognition of their, that we're on their lands and so forth. I don't know if that's a younger generation thing that's happening, or just a opening of new relations. But boy, I can tell you from firsthand experience, you could grow up in San Diego in the late 20th century and not have that sense of solidarity that you describe in Bishop, Nancy.
Yeah. So I guess I've never known any different.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear that you're feeling that, you're seeing and feeling that growing sense of solidarity. That's encouraging.
Yes, absolutely.
I think that particular topic, I think it's important to acknowledge, as far as here in this particular community, Logan Heights being probably the second oldest community here overall. And the recognition that many of the families that still live in this particular community are Kumeyaay. And the reason I like stress that is because for getting ready for the commemoration of the Chicano Park celebration this particular year, and as almost every year, the Kumeyaay play a very important role on this commemoration. As a matter of fact, the first day is all dedicated to the Kumeyaay. So if people that are interested in learning a little bit more about it, we're having a programming from April 19th to the 25th through this virtual experience, the Chicano Park Steering Committee. So if people are interested in learning a little bit more, they're welcome to tap into that. Yeah,
thanks for that, Rigo. We should circulate. I know I've seen you shared a calendar with our staff, but we should get the word out about those events. And I was fascinated to hear, Rigo, that you mentioned that what is now going to become the Chicano, or is opening as the Chicano Park Museum, was the original Chicano Federation office. Where are your offices now? Where are your offices now, Nancy? Where are your headquarters?
We're in North Park, and we've been here for, almost 20 years.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, we have to go. You have to check out. Do you know who was the executive director back in the day when the Federation was at that building down in Chicano, near Chicano Park?
The way that Irma Castro tells it is that the organization had a different executive director every week, depending on what was happening here, you know.
I do remember that.
Yeah. Yeah, when you were describing federation work and alliance work, I was like, oh boy, that's important stuff and that's hard stuff.
Yeah.
So
Getting group.
Where does the
Yeah.
funding come from for the Chicano Federation? What are your sources?
So all of the above. It's federal, state, individual, corporate, right? We have a combination of everything. Yeah.
Well, Nancy, thank you so much for joining us today. This has just been wonderful for us to get to know you a little more and to hear more about the Chicano Federation. I think Jim spoke for many of us in saying that we knew of the Federation, but didn't know a lot about your work. And but having learned a little bit more, we certainly appreciate your efforts and that of your staff and the hard work that you've put in this last year. And so we give you, un fuerte aplauso for all of your labor on behalf of the community. And I maybe just invite our friends to join with a round of applause. And thank Nancy so much for being with us. Rigo, thanks for leading the conversation. We're going to reconvene next week and we'll tilt our conversation back to the borderland proper. And I wonder, Jim, do you want to say a word about the guests? I think you're going to interview a couple of guests next week. Would you tell folks what you have in mind?
Yes. And just thanks again, Nancy, for joining us. And thank you, Rigo, for leading the discussion. So next week, there'll be two journalists from the Voice of San Diego. Maya Sri Krishnan, who has been the border reporter for the Voice of San Diego. Until fairly recently, she's become now an associate editor, but still has her hand in border-related reporting. And Mackenzie Elmer, who's the environmental reporter for the Voice of San Diego. They did a story together. One of the stories we'll talk about, not the only one, but they did a story together about recycling the water from the Tijuana River and what are the challenges and so forth of that. And so we'll be talking about, Maya has reported from Honduras where the caravans stage before they leave. And I'm just curious to know what it's like being a female reporter in Mexico. That's got to be a bit of a challenge. Or being a male reporter for that matter. But so it should be an interesting conversation talking about migration, the border, environmental cleanup in the Tijuana River.
Great, well, thanks. Well, and thank you all for joining us in the Zoom room. Those of you who are watching on Facebook, if you'd like to join us in the Zoom, just drop us a line. We'll send you the link. This is Via Voices, voices from around and across Via International's network. One more thank you to Nancy Maldonado of the Chicano Federation. I feel like we've discovered some common turf, and maybe we'll have the chance to continue in conversation and maybe even get to work together. So thank you once more for joining us. Very good. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week. Hasta la próxima.